Releasing back in 2019, A Plague Tale: Innocence is a game focused on stealth and survival as you traverse the dark world of France during the 100 Years' War. As a plague eats away at the region, main character Amicia must protect her brother Hugo and find a cure for his mysterious illness. A Plague Tale: Innocence received pretty high ratings from users and critics alike upon its release, with it sitting at very positive in terms of Steam reviews. Developed by Asobo Studio and published by Focus Entertainment, A Plague Tale: Innocence was actually an indie title that has since made big splashes and even got a sequel last year called A Plague Tale: Requiem. A Plague Tale: Innocence is honestly unlike most games I've played. In terms of its gameplay and level design, I was pretty blown away by the survival and stealth mechanics and how difficult the puzzles in this game could actually be. The visuals were also absolutely fantastic, but the real amazing piece of this game had to be the story and its ability to delve fully into the ideas of guilt, sacrifice, family, love, and trauma. As with all my other reviews, I'm going to keep this one spoiler-free, and I'm going to delve into multiple aspects, starting with the plot of the game. A Plague Tale: Innocence centers its story around two young children from 14th century France during the 100 Years' War. Hugo and Amicia de Rune seem to live quite ordinary lives. However, Hugo is sick, and because of this, his mother spends most of her time tending to him, which leaves Amicia to grow up quite a good number of years without her mother in her life. Amicia doesn't really know why Hugo is sick or what he's sick with exactly, but it's enough to basically keep him completely isolated from the outside world. This makes Amicia quite annoyed, but her father, Robert de Rune, does his best to try and help her feel better. He teaches her how to use a sling, and this obviously comes in handy as this is Amicia's main weapon the entire time, but we'll get into that a little later in this video. Everything seems to be normal until one day when the Inquisition arrives at the de Rune's front door. Led by the intimidating Lord Nicholas, the Inquisition is searching for Hugo to take him away. Of course, the de Rune family won't just give up their son, and they are slaughtered for resisting. Amicia and Hugo's mother, Beatrice, helps them escape and tells Amicia to go to an alchemist named Laurentius. The now orphaned de Rune siblings must survive in a world that has been affected by an extreme version of the Black Plague known as the Bite. The rats that are spreading the disease don't just bite their victims, they also eat some of them alive and use their bones to build their nests. It's actually horrifying, and it makes for some pretty grim and disturbing visuals throughout the game. Unfortunately for the two siblings, they are wanted throughout France by the French Inquisition, and they're basically unsafe anywhere they go, as there is a bounty for their capture. They eventually make it to Laurentius after extreme plight and tribulations, and when they do, they meet his apprentice, Lucas. Much to their dismay though, Laurentius has fallen ill with the plague, and Lucas decides to help them figure out how they can cure Hugo. Laurentius instructs Lucas to take Amicia and Hugo to the Chateau d'Ombrage, which is a mysterious castle that belongs to the de Rune family, where they will supposedly be safe and will be able to help find the cure for Hugo. Following this, the three children stumble upon the remnants of a battlefield where a fight has taken place between the English and the French. At one point though, Hugo and Amicia are captured by the English soldiers, who reveal that there is a ransom that will be paid by a mysterious third party. A thief named Melly and her brother Arthur help Amicia and Hugo escape, but their escape is almost foiled when the French Inquisition and Lord Nicholas arrive to take them and pay the ransom. If I explain much more than this in regards to the story, it would be honestly quite difficult, seeing as it would spoil too much, but their capture by the English is really where the story starts to shape up quite a lot, and this is where the story also picks up the pace and takes a turn for a much darker tale than it already was. The gameplay is centered around survival and stealth. There isn't much hands-on combat, seeing as Amicia is a young teenage girl and Hugo is a little boy, so it would obviously be very difficult for them to take on soldiers armed with swords, maces, and shields and such weapons. When you play A Plague Tale: Innocence, you play as Amicia from a third-person perspective. The stakes in this game are extremely high, and if you're captured or hit once, you will instantly die. This is honestly something that I found myself liking about this game, because it became much more immersive and realistic playing through it. You actually try to strategize about the stealth actions you take rather than just run and gun it. You're aware that you will not survive the level if you are captured, so you will have to do your best to work around the guards. Amicia has one weapon, which is a sling. This sling is what she uses to do things like throw rocks in order to break chains, create distractions, or stun guards so that she can run away fast enough. If an enemy's head is unprotected, she can use the sling to kill them with what's basically a headshot. A lot of A Plague Tale's gameplay is structured around survival and puzzles, which can prove to be quite difficult sometimes, and they might be annoying if you really hate puzzles. Personally, I've played a lot of stealth and survival games, and I've gotten relatively used to puzzles, so they're not as annoying as they used to be when I first started playing more video games. I did find myself getting stumped quite a bit in A Plague Tale every now and then, but it was honestly just me not looking hard enough when I was playing sometimes. Once you figure out the solution, it kind of induces that whole "oh" moment. Since rat hordes will instantly kill Amicia and Hugo, you also have to work around these, because you can't really just kill the rats the same way you could the guards, for instance. And in regards to the guards, if they have helmets on, you can't really just kill them either. But in terms of the rats, you have to direct them away by using light. This is typically done by lighting braziers, torches, haystacks, and other things. Some of these things burn out really quickly, so you need to move very fast from fire to fire or light source to light source in order to evade the rat hordes. Amicia's knowledge of alchemy through Lucas helps her craft special types of ammunition and supplies. She can start fires and suppress fires, for instance, which I found were the core of the gameplay later on. For a good amount of gameplay time, you can't really suppress fires until you basically start allowing rat hordes to sick guards. Since this is a stealth survival game, you need to crouch and hide a lot, and you definitely need to distract guards in order to get away from them and to the next area. This is something that I personally had a lot of fun with, because it really does get your mind working to figure out the best solution when faced with a group of enemies, for instance. I also thought the sling was a very creative weapon for a video game. You tend to see games defaulting to, the basic stuff, guns, bows and arrows, swords, daggers, etc., but A Plague Tale's utilization of a sling was really clever. I also think it makes sense, seeing as Amicia is a young girl and she has no real training with weapons, but she's good with the sling. It also allows for her to figure out ways to outsmart her enemies, which I think is pretty unique gameplay-wise. I also think that having Hugo with you raises the stakes even more. Since Amicia's main goal is to keep Hugo from the Inquisition, you are pretty much constantly trying to make sure that he is safe and hidden. Sure, you can leave Hugo in spots sometimes and finish off the gameplay in a certain section, for instance, but the problem is if you leave Hugo for too long, he's gonna get scared and eventually start screaming, which, what does that do? Alert guards to your position. This is a pretty annoying thing in the game because you obviously can't leave Hugo for too long, and you'd think that a kid who knows he has to survive, would need to stay quiet, but Hugo is kind of portrayed as being a little bit really innocent, mostly because, let's face it, he was isolated from the outside world for a long time, so I guess in some way this does make sense, and it does raise the stakes in another aspect, of course. Additionally, the rats provide a whole other layer of even more stakes to the gameplay. While hiding from guards is one thing, the rats are relentless and crazy, and if you're not near a fire, they will, 100% guaranteed, destroy you. This makes for some pretty disturbing moments throughout the game, and it does really show just how dark this plague is towards the overall story. The rats can be annoying at some points, but to be fair, that is one of the main pieces of the overall plot, and it does make total sense once you reach the end why the rats are so evil and relentless in the way that they are. You might find it weird gameplay-wise for some points, but story-wise, I think it wraps up with a proper explanation. I did read some reviews about this game prior to playing it, and some complained that the sling tools were too convenient and don't don't leave enough room for mistakes to have consequences, but I will have to kinda disagree with this sentiment. Yes, there are resources scattered throughout, but in all fairness, you need some of these tools to get by some levels. There are seriously a few levels where if you don't use the tool, it's basically impossible to win. And I didn't really feel like the difficulty needed too much tweaking. Yes, it's an easier play once you get the hang of all the mechanics, but there are still some points that are more difficult and require more thought, especially through those puzzles I mentioned earlier. Visually and atmospherically, A Plague Tale is a brutal game. There is no holding back from the onset about the level of brutality you will face, and it only gets more intense as the game goes on. There are some pretty gross sequences, and I have to say, if you're the type of person to be squeamish, this game might be rough for you. If you don't care, then it's probably not going to affect you at all. And the thing is, everything in this game is basically hostile to Amicia and Hugo. You don't get a break. Let me put it at that. From the rats to the Inquisition to villagers, everything is dangerous, and this makes the whole game absolutely grim. And to me, this was a very strong point for A Plague Tale: Innocence. The hostility of the world is what raises the stakes for the player, because you really don't know if there is any place left that is safe from the bite, from the Inquisition, or really from anything. A Plague Tale: Innocence also greatly impressed me with its visual quality, especially considering that this is an indie game. I think it's crazy to see just how good indie games can be. The lip syncing wasn't always the best, to be honest, and a lot of the characters didn't have too much emotion on their faces, but this comes second to the fact that the game world itself is just so terrifying. You kind of don't really pay too much attention to the facial animations at some point, and honestly, I didn't really care because the game overall was pretty fun anyways. The zones that you play in throughout the game are all quite dark, and much of the gameplay takes place around the dark. This is when the rats are out in full swing, so it only adds on to the severity of the bite and its impact on the story. Like I mentioned earlier, the game is pretty grim. Amicia frequently needs to resort to letting guards get devoured alive or walking through fields of the dead. There is one particular nightmare sequence she has that's pretty rough to watch as she gets swarmed by rats. For the most part, the game doesn't really hold back on how nasty the bite is. A Plague Tale: Innocence certainly delves into emotions, especially those of guilt and fear. Amicia is very much feeling extreme guilt over what she needs to do in order to survive. But I think that the game pitches the characters in such bleak situations that you can't help but feel that the only way to survive is to take such drastic measures. And that's the beauty of the story, I believe. Thematically, guilt is the main centerpiece of Amicia's struggle. She knows that she has to take care of Hugo, and she knows that she must do anything in order to cure him and prevent the Inquisition from taking him away. However, she also has to do a lot of horrible things to people who could otherwise be considered innocent, even if they are guards. She feels extreme guilt as she goes through the bleak world around her, realizing that those lives weigh down on her because she had to take them. And I think it's a lot of burden for a child to bear, but her love for Hugo keeps her going, even if she is terrified. And it's the sibling love in the story that I absolutely love to see. You can tell that Amicia wants nothing more than to protect her brother, which is a really unique story to see in video games. As an older sister myself, playing through this game, I often found my mind diverting towards wondering what I would personally feel in such a situation where my younger sibling is at threat from so many things. It's definitely not an easy thing to imagine, let alone live through. Sure, the game isn't supposed to have a super realistic story, but the power of the bond of siblings is displayed so amazingly in this game that I couldn't help but love it. And the name Innocence plays a big role in this story thematically as well. Children are typically associated with this idea of innocence. Children are still inexperienced and unaware of the real world around them. They don't perceive things the same way that adults do. Still, children sometimes are pitched into situations where they must grow up quickly in order to survive. And this is what happens with Amicia. She was a young girl in a nice home in the French countryside, and within seconds, she was an orphan on the run from the Inquisition, and she had to learn to become stone cold in the face of death so she could protect Hugo from the world. And Hugo is very much an accurately depicted child. Children aren't always rational, and neither is Hugo, but he is sick, afraid, and he feels lost. Yet through all the trials, tribulations, and perils he faces with Amicia, he constantly feels connected to her. The two siblings feel that they need each other because of all of the trauma they face together. Still, even though Amicia has been with Hugo all this time, Hugo still misses his mother. This makes a lot of sense, and it's very emotionally realistic. Hugo grew up most of his life in his room with his mother, who was trying to cure him of his ailment, so of course he would feel very attached to her, and he barely knew Amicia, so he didn't really feel attached to her before at all. Additionally, I like that A Plague Tale: Innocence is about real people's struggles. It's not about a young girl who is perfect at everything. She's not a superhero, she's not extraordinary, she's just trying to survive. She's just trying to keep whatever little bits are left of her family. She's just trying to keep herself pulled together so that her brother can survive. She is just surviving. And that's what makes me love this story so much. I like that the world is grim and bleak and that you're not the hero that's gonna save everything. Amicia is just trying, and it makes a lot of sense. A lot of moments had me very emotionally moved, and I don't know who wrote the story or the script of this game, but I think they really understood how to capture the familial bond of siblings, and they really understood how to craft a tale that emotionally gets to you. You're rooting for Amicia and Hugo to survive, and for them to escape, even if it feels like all hope is lost in this dark world. Honestly, it really shows talent when a writer can emotionally move you, and it really shows what passion the team had making this game when you are actually feeling fear with the characters at many points. Good on the team, because you can tell that they really did love working on this game. That's something you tend to notice a lot more in indie games, since indie games typically have smaller, more passionate creative teams working on those games. A Plague Tale: Innocence is a stealth game with a lot of survival elements through and through. It is relatively scripted, and there isn't much room for explorability or your own choices to be made in the overall grand scheme of things. You have a choice in some aspects when you are conducting missions, like if you want to distract or kill guards, but the choices are not too crazy beyond this. However, this is a linear game, and I knew this going in. I typically do not mind linear games if they have a story or something else to boost in place of open exploration. And I have to say, this game did just that. It didn't only nail the story, but it was an experience that I found worth every hour I played. I wouldn't say this game is super replayable per se, just because at the end of the day, once you've seen the sequence, it's not really any different any other time you play it. That's just, I guess, if you really like the story and you want to play it again, then by all means you can. But I would say in terms of replayability, it's not super high on that scale. And it's not a super long game either. For the most part, it takes about 12 to 15 hours for most people to beat, but in those hours you do get an experience that's movie worthy. A Plague Tale is immersive and dark, and its bleak and grim world only adds on to that. Again, you're not the superhero of this tale, you're just trying to survive. And I think this is what truly helps this game excel to be one of my most favorite games I've ever played. I loved A Plague Tale: Innocence, even if there were some things that I didn't find too particularly great, like the controls and their occasional clunkiness. But I think that the game is overall well worth every dollar. The boss battles were fun and genuinely terrifying to play through. The rat hordes are crazy, and they add a lot to the dark nature of this game. Lord Nicholas was honestly more intimidating than the actual Grand Inquisitor, but I loved how mysterious his character was, all while being such a central point to the story and the conflict. Amicia and Hugo were so amazing to play as, and I love the bond that the writers built between them. It really does help delve into the darkness of humanity and the beauty of emotions all at once. You meet so many characters throughout the game that add more depth to the story and really showcase the bond that strangers build through traumatic moments and experiences. A A lot of real, raw human feelings were present in this game. I don't usually tear up or cry at games, but this game got me close to that point several times, I'm not gonna lie. If I had to give a numbered score for this game, I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10 just for the few things that I didn't like. Additionally, I couldn't really give it a 9 out of 10 just because I think the story didn't really end off as strong as it started, unfortunately. But it wasn't so bad to the point where I'd knock it down to like 8 or just like a 7 out of 10. Honestly, a side note here, I was pretty shocked to see that IGN did give this game a 7 out of 10 because it really is a lot better than some games they've given higher scores to. But I mean, I guess IGN hasn't always been the best at rating games before, so whatever it is, I think they were pretty unfair to this game. Sure, there are some negative aspects to this game. I won't lie and say that the game is 100% perfect, hence why I didn't give it a 10 out of 10 for instance. There are some levels that I didn't really like too much. Some of the puzzles could be really irritating when the solution is just kind of so annoying to work with. Some of the boss fights could have been a bit better. There was an early on boss fight that felt kind of out of place compared to what was happening at the time, but I do, despite all of this, wholeheartedly recommend that you play A Plague Tale: Innocence in 2023. And I do believe that this game is genuinely worth the hours I put into it. A Plague Tale: Innocence, it's an amazing game, and it has a story at its core with gameplay centered around it that works very well. It is an experience that I would say is worthwhile, fulfilling, grim, but beautiful all at once. And with that being said, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed that video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe with notifications set to all so you never miss out on a single upload. Comment below your thoughts on A Plague Tale: Innocence and if you've played it or are interested in playing it. Don't forget to check out our website for gaming news, entertainment, and more. The link to that, as well as all of our other links, are in the description below.